If you are going on Google Maps or Apple Maps and you want to get somewhere, you need two things. You need to know where you're at and you need to know where you're going. We can bring competence in the classroom where we're at and where our students are at and where we're wanting our students to get to.
There's nothing wrong with saying, I've been in this situation a million times. As an English teacher, as a media teacher, when a student will be like, oh, hey, miss, can you help me with this? Or what does this mean? There's nothing wrong with me. I don't have to pretend I'm competent if I'm not.
You can't force anyone to trust you, but you can create an environment where they make the decision to trust you.
Yeah, it's like
And
that thing,
that is
right?
like the decision to be vulnerable. How to stop shaking when you're on stage if you get nervous. You squeeze your glutes so then the blood rushes there.
Podclass acknowledges the true and traditional custodians of the land we meet on here today. We are meeting in Naarm and pay our respect to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people listening today.
So no one told you teaching was gonna be this way. Your lesson plans are jokes, your patience broke, you're feeling in disarray. It's like you're always stuck in report writing, when it hasn't been your day, your week, your month, or even your school year. But I'll be here for you.
When the students start to riot,
I'll be here for you.
even if your coffee has gone cold,
I'll be here for you, 'cause you're there for them too.
Hello and welcome back to Podclass. My name is Wil and I'm here with Skye and Amanda, and this is the one on building trust in the classroom.
You are joined by the three of us. Together we are the founders of both Youth Leadership Academy Australia and Youth Engagement Project. We're two teachers and a 21-year-old. And let's chat all things building trust. Why is it important? And we've also got 4 C's to share with you, which is kind of like our recipe. Not the C's you might be thinking, different C's.
I feel like
Not the
C's
great
is
C
just triggering
that
when we
are
talk
in-
about like teaching anyway. You can't just say C's. It's
I
like,
know,
I know,
it's
I have
so
bad
bad.
recollections of my own childhood from that. So let's not
Aw.
go there. Now, trust. Why is it important? What is it? What does it mean in a teaching context? What does it mean for our students?
I think it's firstly, you can't force anyone to trust you, but you can create an environment where they make the decision to trust you.
Yeah, it's like
And
that thing,
that
right?
is like the decision to be vulnerable.
Yeah, it's like that thing, right? You can't go, just trust me on this. Or this is an environment of trust. And it's like, that gives me the ick.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
like,
boy.
I don't trust you. You're telling me to trust you? I'm not going to trust you just because you're saying it.
Yep.
You have to kind of earn that trust and prove that someone can actually have that trust with you, right?
I feel like trust is one of those places where actions speak louder than words is a real thing, right? And it's something as well that I feel like we build incrementally over time. And it's that old saying of, you could spend all this time building it and it can also topple really quickly.
Yes.
So
fast.
no pressure, but that's also true, right? And if we reflect on our own lives, when we think about environments where we've really trusted someone, and maybe that was a teacher or a parent or a significant other or an adult in our world, like that trust has been built over time. And similarly, if we reflect on a time when trust has been broken, it can be broken really quickly. So I guess as educators, as people in our schools and communities, how do we build it and how do we maintain it?
Though I
is the
do
big
feel
thing.
like disclaimer, like it would be remiss of us to say there are going to be some situations where you can't promise, like I'm thinking about in that disclosure space and that safety space building
Oh,
for
100%.
students, like
Yeah.
outside of this, like trust in that space is different to the trust that we're talking about today.
Yes.
In this episode, just to clarify.
And I also
Absolutely.
would like to challenge you as we do go through the 4 C's. Try and think about moments when they pop up in either your classroom or your life and how it's either made you feel like you can trust someone as well.
Yeah, for sure. And so I guess before we get into the 4 C's, just talking about why is trust so important in our classrooms and in our spaces. And it does contribute so much to the environment. And we know that building an environment of safety and belonging, which, trust is woven through that, is so important to learning. And I guess the reason why is
Literally, learning doesn't happen without it. It's like
yes.
one and the same.
And the
Yeah.
reason why is super connected to our state, our body, our nervous system. We've all heard of that phrase, fight or flight. And when we're in an environment where maybe we're not feeling that trust or that safety or belonging, we can have those triggered moments where our amygdala fires, where we're in that state of fight or flight. And that's where our nervous system goes into a state of a sympathetic state. And so what actually happens when that occurs is quite literally our body gets ready to fight or flee, and blood goes to our limbs, and it goes away from our vital organs, and it goes away from our brain and more so into our external limbs, as though we're literally ready for those moments.
And all the psychology teachers listening are like,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
this is exactly
That's
what
exactly
we
what
need.
happens.
That's why you
Important.
shake on, like, if you're nervous about something, you start shaking because there's so
Yes.
much blood.
Yeah.
So they actually,
And your
sorry, can I
digestion
say this
switches
side
off,
note?
like so many things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Side note on how to stop shaking when you're on stage if you get nervous.
Hot tips with Wil Massara. We're ready for
You
it.
have
Hot
to
stage tips.
Yeah,
Let's go.
yeah, you have to you squeeze your glutes so then the blood rushes there.
Like when you're giving blood, it's the same thing.
Is it?
You have to like squeeze,
Oh, yeah,
squeeze
yeah,
your
yeah.
like legs or squeeze your
Sorry,
thighs
back to
together
building
to make
trust.
the blood. make the blood come out.
So when we're in that state, it's harder to focus because
Yeah.
our oxygenation levels and our blood in our crucial organs is different. So versus when we're in a state of parasympathetic or our rest and digest state, that's where we want to be for ultimate learning. That's where we can focus, it's where we can absorb, it's where we can get creative and learn in the classroom.
So how do we actually create that? That's the real question. And this is where this 4Cs recipe kind of comes into it, because we know we can't just be like to a class of teens, trust us, you know, this is an environment of safety and belonging. It's like, you can't just do that. So how do we do that without explicitly labeling it so that they have a sense, right? And it's that famous quote, we all love it. It's that Maya Angelou quote that people won't remember what you said, people won't remember what you did, but people will always remember how you made them feel.
And I just want to jump in with like a credibility, a piece of like why we feel like we're a little bit credible to talk about this. Last term, we hosted a national tour with 10,000 young people.
Yes.
And so many comments came up of they don't know what we did, but they felt safe and heard in a space of thousands of young people.
Yeah.
And it was literally following these principles that we made that happen.
Yeah. So we can break down that feeling of safety, belonging, and trust building in these 4Cs. So we've alluded to it a lot. What is the first C?
The
Wil
first
Massara.
the first C flows very nicely from the last episode we just did. The first one's compassion, and that's the understanding of Gen Z. And we spoke about that in length last episode on how having empathy and understanding of the climate crisis that we're living in, the cost of living crisis that we're all living in, and understanding that it's not just your generation, but it's our generation as well.
We might be experiencing things like differently, but they're still shared experiences. So cost of living for us might literally be felt through our paychecks and a sense of responsibility for our families or whatever it might be. Whereas Gen Z, they might be literally feeling that stress of like their own parents or guardians or those other things, or feeling a sense of responsibility to contribute in some way. Like we're still having the same experiences. It's just our interpretation of them and how our body and brain process them that are different.
Yeah.
And I love what you say, Will, about building compassion. When we're building compassion, when you ask meaningful questions, you get meaningful answers.
Yeah.
So if we're looking to find that common ground, that empathy, and we're not eliciting that in our environments or with our young people, we can look at the questions we're asking, you know, because that contributes so deeply
Instead
into
of
the
being
answers we're
frustrated,
getting.
like, why aren't these Gen Zs just opening up and sharing about their lives? It's like, well, what questions are you asking them? How are you connecting with them? Are you speaking into their listening? You know?
And I would also love to add, building trust doesn't just occur with those around us, it occurs with ourselves. And this compassion piece is not just about the people outside of us, it's relevant to ourselves as well. If we don't have compassion for ourselves, you know we have these incredibly demanding, intense roles that with a never-ending list of jobs. Like at some point, that compassion piece has to come into play, because if we're not compassionate to ourselves, it's going to be a lot harder for us to find that compassion with those around us, with our students, our family members, our significant others, whoever that may be.
And I think like that's probably a journey that I'm on now of becoming more compassionate, because I used to always live by the quote of Malcolm X. It's like, if not me, then who, and if not now, then when? And there'll be so much pressure on doing stuff. I'm like, well, it's not fully my responsibility to save the world.
No, and you can't, and we've spoken about this before, like you can't give from an empty cup.
Yeah.
So being compassionate and giving that to ourselves is really important. But building trust, compassion is that first C. So what is the second C?
Wil Massara.
Consistency.
Consistency.
I love this one because it happened so much when I was in school of like, I would be talking and someone else would be talking to the teacher, but they would be talking about soccer and the teacher was a soccer teacher. Like they loved soccer. They would finish their conversation. They would just be like, well, why are you still talking? I'm like, you're literally just talking as well. And we've seen this so much during COVID. I think that like the best example, not to get political, but is that like when they'll let like A-list celebrities in the country, but not your average Jeffrey. And they were like, no, you can't come in because you don't have millions of dollars. And that consistency, you can see like how much trust
is broken
that broke
in those
with
moments.
like between the government and humans, right?
Yeah,
and I like
absolutely.
that. Again, not to get political, but you did see a change in government because the people didn't trust the government.
Yeah. And so if I simplify this to a school level, right, I worked as a year level coordinator for like a number of years in the school environment, and even things like consistency, ensuring that if we have a school uniform policy where, you know, I worked at an all girls school, you're not allowed to wear more than 2 sets of earrings or whatever it might be. And yet you tell like one student, or you give them a reminder one day and then you turn a blind eye to another student, and that they're so aware of that stuff. So that consistency is really key. And you can do that in a respectful and well-meaning way where you're coming from a place of compassion, but you have to be consistently doing that. And I think too, like consistency is also about showing up, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like, you know, we want our young people to be able to rely on us. We know that chaotic and absent teaching is one of the things that contributes to a young person's disengagement in school as well. So actually being consistent, showing up and following through on those things that you say you will, whether that's like a consequence or a challenging conversation, or whether that's a reward and a great outcome from learning. We need to be consistent in both areas.
Yeah, and I would love to just add something there on that piece around chaotic and absent teaching, because we all have our days, right? Like we all have those days where we haven't slept or something hasn't gone right or something going down in our personal lives. And I feel like what we can do in those moments, which holds trust and holds consistency, even in the face of those challenges, is just be authentic.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, and it's like if we're a secondary teacher, it's okay for us to come in and be like, I'm going to be real, everyone. I'm not feeling my best today. And so let's just show up together. Let's work together.
Yeah.
That authenticity is not taking trust. It's building trust, right?
Huge amounts.
Yes. And it
Huge.
allows us to show up consistent with who we are.
And
Because the
we talk about,
alternative to that is coming in being all angry and snappy.
And chaotic and absent.
Yeah.
right? And then we know that our young people, like it's a mirror. And if we're showing up in that way and we're like snappy or grumpy or whatever it is, that energy is just going to be mirrored straight back to us.
Give some permission to
And I
them.
think too, like one of my goals for this year is like that idea of like we're human beings, not human doings. And it's the same thing, right? It's like how do we become
Teachers, calling all teachers human beings, not
true,
human
right?
doings.
But like also what are we modeling to our young people in the classroom if we're like, if our focus is on do, baby shark, do, no. But if it's like, but if that's our focus, it's going to be stuck in your head now forever.
Mommy
Yeah.
But if our
shark,
focus is on that doing, that's what we're modeling. So we're modeling that like, in order to be successful or to be rewarded or whatever it is, that we have to be in this do mode all the time. We're not being, and being is where our feelings happen. Being is where we're able to express ourselves. Being is where human happens. And so we have to be able to do that for ourselves, so be a human being, but also model that for our young people and consistently be human beings.
Yes.
You know, and have those same expectations for ourselves and for our students.
So that leads us beautifully into our third C. Our second C was consistency. Moving into our third C, it is character. And character is that exact piece of being human.
Yeah.
We are human. We come with our own set of beliefs, of values, of experiences, of approaches and stories and everything like that. And I think leaning into that is power. Leaning into that builds trust, builds safety, builds belonging.
And if I may, when I first started teaching, I think I felt as though I had to almost like appeal to the kids in my classroom and their interests and things for the sake of like my own self and beliefs and values. And like a really simple example might be like if I had a young person who's say like they're a real cat person, and I might be like, oh, I'm so into cats as well. I'm not. I'm highly allergic to cats. I'm a total dog person. But do you know what I mean? But like that's that character thing, right? And if you're doing that and then the next in the next class, you're having a conversation with a student, you're like, oh, I'm totally a dog person. Like, I have a pet dog.
Consistency piece.
Yeah, but also it's that character piece too. It's being true to yourself
Yeah.
as well. It's that authenticity. And a kid's not going to go, oh, well, I hate Miss Hughes because she's a dog person, not a cat person.
Yes.
But what they're going to relate to and where the trust is built is in like that authenticity sharing.
Yes.
So it's like, oh, I love that you're a cat person. That's really great for you. I can't be in the same room as a cat without an EpiPen.
Yeah.
And that's my truth. you
Yeah,
know?
And I think
yeah.
like showing up
But-
with that gives a young person permission to do the same.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes,
but
exactly.
also tell me about your cat. What is their
Yeah.
name? What's the cutest thing they do? Like, what's their weird character trait, right?
And like
Yeah.
the
we can
bond
still
is
build
off,
understanding.
Like, it may not be off the same animal, but it's off the same feeling, right?
Yeah.
Dogs and cats.
Yeah.
And they want to play. Like teens are so keen to grow up and have independence and have agency and autonomy of their lives. But we all have this inner child, and we know that in terms of brain development, young people look a lot older on the outside than where their brains are actually at on the inside. And so if we can tap into our playfulness and that playful nature as teachers, we also encourage that with them, and that's relationship building. That's
Yeah.
trust building.
And I just want to touch on as well, I think it's important to acknowledge at this point that for many of us, we're going to work in schools and environments where not necessarily all of our values and beliefs are going to be something we put on the table every day. And that could be because of the, the education system we work in or the boundaries of our school. And I guess what we would love to share is don't let that hide your character, because your
Yes.
character can show up in those little moments without, for example, projecting your political view or whatever that may be.
Yeah.
It can literally show up in a moment of, oh my gosh, well, I cannot pat a cat to save myself,
Yeah.
but tell me about your cat.
Yeah.
Right? That's where our character shines through. And in fact, I feel like, and you say it as well, Will, that so often trust is built in those little moments. And character and relationship is built in those little moments as well.
And that's when people start getting excited about coming to your class.
yes.
That's when young people talk about you in the schoolyard, not in a positive way at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, not
That's
like,
a-
oh, I've got Mr. Massara's
That's-
class next.
that's
Oh
when
my
they-
gosh,
that's-
imagine
Very excited.
Mr. Massara. That would be so
If you ever
funny.
became a
Oh, I
teacher.
love it. Whenever we work in a school, they're like, sir. I'm like, I am Will.
So
So our three
third
C's,
C,
what 3 C's so far have
Let's hear
been
them.
compassion, consistency, and character. And our fourth and final C is
Competence.
competence. Huge
tell us
one.
more, Will.
See, like this could be really iffy because I could be like, you need to be good at your job. But it's not meant to. It's not meant to come across as that. It's again with that authenticity piece of like. I'll share from my experience. I did accounting for a year, and we had a teacher who often struggled with the questions that we were answering as well. So as
Sorry, your teacher didn't know the answers
they didn't know the
to the
answer.
questions
Yeah,
they were asking.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we would spend 80 minutes all together. There was about 12 of us in the class
Yeah.
doing this one question, and we would all get incredibly frustrated because we're not moving along in the course content. We're falling behind. And what the result of that was, like, we didn't trust her. Like, there was absolutely no trust in that classroom whatsoever.
Yeah.
In year
You weren't
12, a
trusting
year
in her
later.
competence or in her
Yeah.
knowledge of that subject material.
So a year later, year 12, there was 3 people left in that class.
Yeah.
Everyone else had dropped it.
And
Yep.
if I may, in defense of teachers, one, it's the most challenging job, I think,
Yeah,
ever.
100%.
Like,
100%.
we talk about this all the time. Outside of nurses and stuff, who has to interact with upwards of 100 people a day in a meaningful way? Like, that's a lot to hold. Secondly, I think... I'm going to blame the government. No, a little bit.
Not to get political.
Not to get
Go
political,
ahead.
but the thing is, right, we are told, like at university, we're like, oh, inquiry-based learning is the next thing. Let's investigate with young people. We're not going to give them the answers. We're going to explore it together, and it's all about a journey. And now in 2024, they're like, oh no, explicit teaching is actually what works in the classroom. It's not inquiry-based because that's way too broad. So now we've got to go back to explicitly teaching these things. And I know as an educator, just coming out of the education system, it feels like you're playing
Yeah.
this game of tennis between like what's the most effective, and we go back and forth. And,
I agree.
And it's hard. I
And
agree
also-
with you. I think
Yeah.
that competence is important, but I think we are compassionate and honest within that competence.
The alternative, what I think could have worked more stronger, is like we could obviously tell that the teacher didn't know,
Was unsure,
was
yeah.
was unsure of the
Yeah.
answer. What we would have preferred is we spend 20 minutes on that. You come to us, bring in that authenticity piece. Say, look, I'm not sure right now. Go and talk to whoever you need to talk to.
Yeah.
Come back the next day with the answer and demonstrate us the solution. And we know that like you're not going to know absolutely everything.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I
But
guess
being honest about that, which
Yes.
speaks to character.
it does speak to character as
Yeah.
well. Let's relate competence to, for example, I know, Will, you talk about if you are going on Google Maps or Apple Maps and you want to get somewhere, you need two things. You need to know where you're at and you need to know where you're going. And I guess we can bring competence in the classroom down to something as it's not simple, but it's also, I guess, clear, as knowing where we're at and where our students are at and where we're wanting our students to get to and what we need to get them there. I think that really feeds into competence, doesn't it?
100% the competence piece. And I think too, there's nothing wrong with saying, I've been in this situation a million times as an English teacher, as a media teacher, when a student will be like, oh, hey, miss, can you help me with this? Or what does this mean? There's nothing wrong with me. I don't have to pretend I'm competent if I'm not.
Yeah.
I can say, I'm like, that's a really interesting question. I've not actually been asked that before.
Yeah.
Can you give me until tomorrow's lesson and I'll come back with an answer for you?
That's so
and that
powerful.
kid goes, oh, that's amazing. They're also a human being. They don't just do, they're not like this walking encyclopedia. I don't crawl into a coffin and drink students' blood at nighttime and then wake up and do it all again.
Goodness.
So
it also comes down to really intense. The little moments, like I remember writing the word, for example, like Renaissance on the board. It's like, oh, let's spell this together, everyone, because I'm not sure. And that's okay because we're not perfect.
We're not.
So our 4 C's.
4 C's. 4 C's.
Compassion.
Let's say them together.
Compassion,
consistency,
consistency, character,
character,
and
and
competence.
competence.
And when we weave all 4 of these into our practice and into our beingness, into our humanness, it builds trust.
This is how we build trust.
And trust leads to creating environments of safety and belonging.
Yeah.
Thank you so
And
much.
An environment of safety and belonging leads to a calm nervous system.
Yes.
And that also allows for optimal learning to take place.
Boom. There we are.
4
Peace out.
C's.
4
Build it
Cs.
up. It's been great.
If your hands are shaking,
If your hands are shaking, squeeze your butt cheeks.
Clench
we know.
your thighs, according to Wil Massara.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Podclass, and we will see you again soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. I'll be here for you, 'cause you're there for them too.